What it do, cuckolds? It's your boy up in this mug, and I'm driving in the rain. Hater on the road, hater in the thunderstorm, cucks. Now this video has to be about one of the biggest lies told to us since WrestleMania. That Seth Rollins is somehow magically some sort of main event guy. Now, everyone's probably thinking, well, hater, Seth Rollins main evented WrestleMania. Did he? I don't think he did, cucks. As we've established many times before, night one main event ain't a real main event. Furthermore, obviously, the only reason that was even the night one main event is because of two factors. Number one, Gunther is one of the worst champions of all time. And two, Roman Reigns had nothing to do, so they stuck him in this match. If this match were CM Punk versus Rollins, this would be the main event on an episode of Raw. You understand me? The only person that brought this match to the main event, whether that's for better or for worse, is the cuckster Roman Reigns. Now, irrespective of that, Seth Rollins, even if it were him and CM Punk, the draw, the A side, it would still be CM Punk. Seth Rollins is far below these guys in the card. This is explained, obviously, by the reactions that they all get. And number two, it's explained by the fact that while CM Punk and Roman Reigns just show up for like a little segment, the show, Monday Night Raw, is revolving around Seth cucking Rollins. Now, with all that being said, you know, for better or for worse, Seth Rollins is showing up to work. And I gotta give some props to that, you know what I mean? He could, based on how he's being positioned, legitimately petition and say, hey, wait a second, you know, Roman Reigns is not better than me. I mean, they would, of course, immediately point to the merchandise sales, but still, he could try to make a move, right? So he's there every week, so I gotta give him props for that. However, I'm giving him props for something that is baseline, for something that everyone should be doing. This new scenario where people show up to work whenever the fuck they want, and they run the inmates run the asylum. This philosophy, nah, I'm not okay with it. Now, in addition to this, he's there every week because he's a mid-carder, much like other mid-carders like El Grande Americano, who's actually more of an undercarder. But anyways, it doesn't matter. The point is, Seth Rollins is being presented now as like the centerpiece of Raw. However, this is a guy that basically hasn't had the world title in years. Now all of you are thinking, hater, did you forget about Rollins' first reign as the world heavyweight champion? No, I did not forget about that. However, I hold that belt to the same level of prestige as I held the ECW rebooted title belt. In the same way that I refuse to believe that Tommy Dreamer and Ezekiel Jackson are WWE World Heavyweight Champions, I refuse to accept that the World Heavyweight title makes someone a world champion. It has the same prestige as the ECW title. It's for the Matt Hardys of the world. It's for the Chavo Guerreros of the world. It's for the Ezekiel Jacksons of the world, right? It is not for real champions. And ironically, at least some of the people that I just mentioned, specifically Matt Hardy, the Wonder, is much better than fucking asswipe Seth Rollins has ever been. Now, because Seth Rollins, before this title, he was in contention for the dumbass, nobody cares at all, United States Championship, which is a complete afterthought. 1 year, the champions didn't want to do anything, so at Elimination Chamber, they decided to have a match for the US title, because like they need to have one, right? They don't have the balls to have it for the world title, because Roman Reigns ain't showing up, and that was the only world title at the time. They don't have the balls to have it for the number one contendership title, because they already had the Rumble for that. So there's no reason to have the Elimination Chamber, right? The whole point of the Chamber is that it establishes typically the world champion that goes to WrestleMania. Or in some cases, right, when we had two belts, one person is established for the Royal Rumble and the other person stays champion. So the Royal Rumble guy holds on to his WrestleMania spot and the world champion has to defend. And then for the other title, the champion holds on to his spot and the number one contender is established through the other Elimination Chamber. That's the way it is. But Seth Rollins, well, I think he won, but who cares? Winning that title and that title match at Chamber is like the equivalent of winning the Andre the Giant Battle Royal. It will do you more harm than good in your career, right? The Andre the Giant Battle Royal exists so people like Carmelo Hayes can win it, and so that when they talk about Carmelo Hayes, they can say he's a former Andre the Giant Battle Royal to make it seem as if he's not what he actually is, and that is an abject failure on the main roster. So with that being said, Seth Rollins was in the U.S. title picture, and all of a sudden now, Seth Rollins is the leader, I suppose. I mean, you could argue that Heyman is the leader, but now the faction of him, Heyman, and Braun is based around Seth Rollins being like, you know, the big deal. It's centered around him, right? It's centered around his success. Like Paul Heyman said straight up, he said it to Jey Uso. He said, look, Braun Breaker has no interest in being WWE champion, or sorry, World Heavyweight champion. He has an interest in slowing you down because the goal is for Seth Rollins to become the World Heavyweight champion, which in my opinion really shows that nobody cares about this title, right? Because Braun Breaker, who is positioned as like a big deal in the future, he's a future prospect, he is someone that is not even getting an opportunity at this title because he doesn't want one. See what I'm saying? It's like when Kevin Owens didn't want to be WWE champion. He's like, I don't deserve the title, right? In this case, Braun Breaker isn't even saying I don't deserve it. He's just straight up saying, I don't want this title. He's literally choosing the life of the lackey over wanting the title. This is going to go over really poorly when we have the inevitable Seth Rollins, Braun Breaker turn, right? Which happens the same way that happened with Triple H and Batista, Triple H and Orton, right? The foreseeable turn. But until that happens, Seth Rollins needs to build himself up to a credible main eventer so that when Braun Breaker beats him, it's not the same as if he beat him today. Because I'll tell you this, if Braun Breaker beats Seth Rollins today, or like, let's say before WrestleMania, it wouldn't be an upset. It wouldn't be an upset at all. It would just be like, oh, Braun Breaker won this match. You know? Like, if Ludwig Kaiser beats Seth Rollins, then that might be considered an upset of sorts, right? But absolutely not if fucking, you know, if Seth Rollins loses to someone like, you know, Gunther or someone like fucking Braun Breaker or even Jey Uso at this point, right? Or even Jey Uso before he won the title, right? Like, he's in that category. And don't think we're morons, motherfucks. Nobody's pulling the wool over our eyes, right? In no shape, way, or form are Jey Uso, Gunther, fucking Seth Rollins, and quite frankly, even Braun Breaker. None of these guys are main eventers. At least at this point, they're all mid-carders. They are firm mid-carders. They're not even upper mid-carders. I don't care that Gunther's the top guy on Raw. Raw must suck if that's the case. And that is the case because Raw has absolutely 0 stars. I guess Roman Reigns is part of the Raw roster. Someone told me, I thought he was telling SmackDown. But what's the point? He never shows up, so it's like he's not there, you know? That's why you have to center the show around Rollins. If Rollins was there, but Roman Reigns wanted a full-time schedule, then the show would center around Roman Reigns. We all know this inherently. Same thing with John Cena, right? If Randy Orton went on Raw, the show should center around Randy Orton, even though Randy Orton is now being positioned as a mid-carder as well, right? He's wrestling for the U.S. title. He's wasting his time wrestling Kevin Owens, you know what I mean? This is not impressive stuff. But Randy Orton at least has the potential to, like, jump to the main event and be believable in doing so when, like, the situation calls for it, right? Like, he can wrestle Cena to, like, a main event pay-per-view, and it feels like a main event. He can wrestle Joe Hendry, and he doesn't feel like a mid-carder, right? He feels like a top guy in WWE beating the top guy in TNA, right? It would be weird, for example, if, like, Ludwig Kaiser beat Joe Hendry, right? Like, TNA has to protect itself a little bit, you know? But in a world of Ludwig Kaisers, you know, Gunther and Seth Rollins seem like main eventers, when in fact, Seth Rollins is an overrated mid-card jobber, motherfucks. He is a mid-carder through and through. Here's how I know, right? When was the last time Seth Rollins main evented anything of worth? Now, let me explain that. When I say main event, I mean he goes on last in the event. If the event has 9 nights, that doesn't mean you have 9 main event matches. That's absurd. One day WrestleMania will be 3 nights. SummerSlam will be 2 nights. And I bet you they're going to talk about, oh, he main evented SummerSlam. Like, it's like, that's not even a thing, you know? But I'm sure they're going to make it a thing. So he never main evented. It was never the last match of any event in years, right? And I said the other caveat, it has to be a real main event. Not a situation where you have like a 10-man match and Rollins is one of them, right? So for example, if Rollins finds himself in the War Games match, and that's going to be the main event, I don't care, right? That doesn't count as a main event participation, because JD McDonough, by that logic, is a pay-per-view main eventer, which is absurd, right? And that, in my opinion, should let you all know how far the standards have gone down, right? There was a time where my favorite wrestler, Christian Cage, he couldn't main event a pay-per-view to save his life. He was massively over. He was better than everyone that's wrestling today by a considerable margin, but he could never main event a pay-per-view. He was in some prominent angles. He was a legitimate World Heavyweight Champion by winning the legitimate World Heavyweight title, but he almost never main evented, right? And all his main events were like Survivor Series, where he's like one of 5 guys. He would make it to like the final 2 or something, but he's one of 5 guys, you know? He would main event like, you know, he's been in like a few Money in the Bank ladder matches. I think one of them main evented. It was the star-studded one with where they're all main eventers. But, you know, he doesn't get props for that because that's like a John Cena match, you know? He was like a Kane, right? There was a long time that Kane just never main evented anything, you know? But nowadays, you have people like JD McDonough, Jacob Fatu, like Solo Sikoa up in this bitch, Jimmy Uso, Finn Balor, main eventing pay-per-views because of the format of like the multi-man match. So if you take away those, you take away some bullshit event, like maybe main event at like Saturday Night Main Event or something, right? Seth Rollins is clearly a mid-carder because in the vast majority, if not all, of his participations in big events, he is in the mid-card. Now, the fact is that he was a main eventer, and I think that's critical to this analysis. Seth Rollins was not always an abject jobber, right? He started out strong. The Shield was a main event act. The Shield did main event, and part of it was because they were the Shield. Like, if you have a match and it's the Shield versus, I don't know, John Cena, like Santino and Sheamus or something like that, right? That is not, the draw there is obviously John Cena and arguably Sheamus and maybe Santino or Daniel Bryan, or if you put someone like that in there. But the real draw is, holy shit, bro, you're seeing now the future. The Shield is the future of this company, right? Because if you have that match and you have like Randy Orton versus Dolph Ziggler, let's say, for the world title, well, it seems like the world title match is more important, but it's not, because the Shield was presented as such, right? They're not presented as Retribution or as Dark State on NXT. They're presented as a big main event act, right? And when the storyline of the Shield came to fruition, they were a main event act, right? They were positioned as being equal to Evolution. And in many ways, it was believable. Even though Evolution has like 3 of the most accomplished wrestlers ever, right? Who are all still like in their quasi-prime, with Orton being firmly in his prime. It was presented as like, the Shield is just better than them, right? And it was presented as believable. It was presented as these guys haven't had that opportunity yet, but all 3 are going to be future world champions. And all 3 became future world champions to varying degrees of success. Seth Rollins peaked at WrestleMania 30-something, whatever the fuck it was, the one where he cashed in. That was his moment. That was his career moment, where he, count it however you want, he main evented that WrestleMania, at least conceptually, right? He didn't main event in terms of the marketing. In other words, nobody bought the pay-per-view thinking they would see Seth Rollins in the main event. But he did main event it. He was the guy that came out on top at the end of WrestleMania 30. He was like the head honcho at the end of that. So that's gotta mean something, you know? But since then, he found himself in these compromised situations. He eventually had his actual run, like his Royal Rumble winning run, where he beat Brock Lesnar. But that was like not a main event match, obviously. And then it was a mid-card match, if we're being honest. It's not a main event, even if it involves Brock Lesnar, if it's like literally the first match. But anyways, it's not here nor there. Like, Brock Lesnar's a main eventer, but main eventers don't always main event, obviously, right? And someone can make that argument for Rollins, but that argument would fall short. Primarily because Rollins doesn't just not always main event, he basically never main events, right? He is a mid-card act that is being elevated. Now, the elevation can happen in an organic way. It can happen in a manufactured way as well that is reasonable, which it may still happen, right? Maybe, like Seth Rollins just goes on a tear and just starts having great matches, great storylines. I highly doubt it, but it's possible, right? But as of now, he's a mid-carder, right? Before, like, WrestleMania, you know, even in WrestleMania, he was in the mid-card, but before WrestleMania, the Seth Rollins match of the night could easily have been, like, Seth Rollins versus literally, like, Ludwig Kaiser. It could have been, like, Seth Rollins versus, like, I mean, for a while, it was Seth Rollins versus Bronson Reed, whose name I nearly forgot. You know what I mean? He was not this big deal at all. He was literally a mid-carder. You know? He was being used to elevate Bronson Reed to the mid-card. Because he sure as shit wasn't going to elevate him to the main event. He can't do that. He's not a main eventer, right? So now, everyone that wrestles Rollins in the foreseeable future, based on the fact that they pretty much told us what the foreseeable future looks like, right? It looks like it's going to be him versus Gunther, him versus Logan Paul, and him versus Jey Uso. And it's at the point now where Logan Paul was introduced as a nobody, as like a guy that Miz has to carry to win like a tag team match that they actually win, you know? And now Logan Paul is legitimately on par with the mid-card. He is a mid-carder. He won the US title. Logan Paul is like an upper mid-carder because he periodically main events. Like, he'll be like, there'll be some random ass Saudi Arabia match, and he'll be like in the main event. You know what I mean? I don't think Rollins has been in a main event since then. You know? Like, Logan Paul is primed as being like a future main eventer. Rollins is being primed as being Rollins, right? As being what he is now, which is a current main eventer. Except the problem is, as I've just illustrated, he's not one, right? Now, like I said earlier, he was one, and that was a decent run, you know what I mean? Like, his world title run after winning it at Mania was pretty good, you know? I think he dropped out of injury. He came back, won it again. He had his Brock Lesnar run, and then after that, shit hit the fan. After that, he's out there like, you know, feuding with like Finn Balor and Kevin Owens and Dean Ambrose and AJ Styles, you know what I mean? The mid-card. Now, I love me some AJ Styles, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. But I don't think anybody reasonable is going to argue that AJ Styles is a main eventer. You know, AJ Styles was basically never a main eventer in WWE, right? Like, some people, I think the issue is that some people seem to think that a main eventer is someone that just main events once. You know what I mean? Or that main events like once every year. No, a main eventer is someone who is consistently in the main event. Meaning that in the next 4 pay-per-views or so, you can expect this asshole to be in a main event. See what I'm saying? Like, back in the day, you know, in the Attitude Era, or even beyond, but in the Attitude Era, right? There were people that were main eventers. It was basically Stone Cold, The Rock. Eventually, in the later parts of the Attitude Era, like right at the tail end of it, you know, before we had the situation, like with the Alliance, we had good old Triple H. He entered that. Mankind was there a little bit. The Big Show was there. And that's it. Everybody else was a mid-carder or an upper mid-carder. Like The Undertaker, player. Call it what you want. But if you were watching back then, you never thought, oh my God, The Undertaker's going to be in the main event. Until, like, he turned into the American Badass when he came back. And then he was, like, a main eventer because he would periodically get title shots. He would periodically be in main events otherwise. And he was instrumental in the whole, like, Alliance storyline. He's, like, one of the unsung heroes because, like, a lot of the focus went on, like, Jericho, Booker T, Austin, Rock, you know, Angle. He was one of the unsung heroes. Then Angle became a main eventer, and then that's it, motherfucks. Everybody else was an upper mid-carder. Like, nobody said Benoit's a main eventer, despite the fact that Benoit main evented several Raws. He main evented some pay-per-views. He was not a main eventer until he became world champion. And he had a main event run, and back to the mid-card it is, and then back to being a murderer it is for him, right? Seth Rollins is the same thing. He's in his mid-card phase. Simple as that. He's in a mid-card phase that they're trying to tell us is not a mid-card phase. In order to convince people like me, which I think represent the majority of casual viewers, not that I am a casual viewer, but I represent the majority of casual viewers. In order to do this, I believe that the situation calls for a restructuring of Raw. Number one, they got to do something to give some prestige to this world title, right? Number one thing that they can do is bring back a legend or a pseudo-legend to win the title ASAP, right? And to have this legend come out and say, I'm very proud to hold this title. The best option they've got probably is Randy Orton, right? He's the only one that can hold it, wrestle consistently, and is not too old to say that, right? Another option would have been John Cena. I would have loved to see Gunther versus John Cena. And then you could have had Roman Reigns versus The Rock if everything was booked correctly. But as we saw, nothing was booked correctly. Anyways, the next step is to have Rollins defeat this legend and establish this as like the legend's very important match. Like, imagine if you had like Sting or something like that, right? Or The Undertaker, player, right? This was like 10 years ago. And Seth Rollins beats Undertaker clean. at WrestleMania or something for this world title. In other words, there needs to be another reason why this feud is happening, right? That would have been perfect. The Undertaker wins the World Heavyweight title, if they had done it years ago, then he loses it at the main event of WrestleMania to anybody. That person is made because they just beat Taker at WrestleMania, and that's why the match is a big deal. It's because it's Taker at WrestleMania. It has nothing to do with the World Heavyweight title, but the World Heavyweight title benefits from it. Another thing they can do is to have a legitimate tournament, like do some screwy finish and have a legitimate tournament where everyone participates, including John Cena, right? And that person loses to establish that John Cena can win the world title, the WWE title, but he cannot win the World Heavyweight title. And then the champion needs to defend it all the time against credible challengers for years, right? That's how the World Heavyweight title, the first formula of it with Triple H, became like a respectable title. Triple H got it, he was already a legend, right? An entire stable was built around him keeping it. It started to gather prestige. Triple H main event at WrestleMania with it, right? And then other people that were big deals either got the title or were otherwise contenders, right? Booker T, motherfucks. Eventually Orton and Batista. Who else? Basically everybody on Raw. Shawn Michaels, you know what I mean? He feuded with Shawn Michaels. The feud was Triple H and Shawn Michaels for the World Heavyweight title, which indicates that Shawn Michaels, a former WrestleMania main eventer, wants this title. The feud now, like next time, it's gonna be fucking Ludwig Kaiser, this bitch, with Jey Uso, right? Indicating that the real wrestlers like Braun Breaker, who have aspirations, have no interest in this title. Sheamus. Why is Sheamus not going after this title? Sheamus would be perfect for this title. I'm not saying he needs to win it, but needs to go after it. The way things are now, the WWE has made it clear. There is one title, the WWE title, and then there's everything else. In the past, even as recent as the Universal title, the Universal title was presented as a big deal. It main evented at WrestleMania. It was held by Brock Lesnar. That's a strategy. And that's the strategy you do now, honestly, quite frankly. Bring Brock Lesnar, have him squash Jey Uso, have him have like a 1-year title reign, and then all of a sudden, people want it. They want the World Heavyweight title. Seth Rollins can then say, wait a second, I beat Brock Lesnar for a world title before, I'm gonna do it again. That right there sounds pretty compelling, right? Not because Seth Rollins wants a title, who gives a shit about him, but because Brock Lesnar has the title. And beating Brock Lesnar is still a big deal. So that's the way that this needs to happen. Raw needs to be restructured. Because otherwise, Seth Rollins is not a main eventer enough on his own to be presented as a main eventer. Even with the world title. It's never going to feel like a big deal. Like, for example, I'll put it to you this way to close. Did anyone think, like seriously, like last year at Crown Stool, did anyone think that somehow Gunther was going to beat Cody Rhodes? Absolutely not. Everyone knew that Gunther is the jobber champion. So there's no way he's beating Cody Rhodes. In the past, however, at Night of Champions, there was one match, an underrated classic in terms of its build, right? Which did exactly what I'm saying. The match was the ECW World Champion, The Big Show, right? The WWE Champion, John Cena, right? And the SmackDown World Heavyweight Champion, King Booker, right? This match elevated the ECW title because Big Show had it, and Big Show would destroy both Booker T and John Cena in real life. So automatically, the title gets validated because it's difficult to overcome the Big Show. Obviously, the WWE title did need to be elevated because John Cena had it, and it was presented as the big title. But the title that benefited the most was the World Heavyweight title because this was during Cena's invincible phase, right? Invincible Cena was beaten, not clean, but what can you expect, by Booker T. Right? Someone interfered, like Edge or something interfered, and Booker T hit the axe kick, and I think he pinned Big Show. He may have pinned Cena. It doesn't matter. It's a triple threat match, so, DQs don't exist, so Booker T won the match and established himself. At that point, I was like, wow, Booker T has reestablished this title, which was already established. Booker T can now argue, I am the main champion of this company. I beat the other two champions. I don't give a shit if John Cena and Edge are going to have a match. I'm going to wrestle Finlay for all I care, and I am now elevated because the title is elevated, but it's elevated by the person. Likewise, the title can elevate a person, but usually the champion must make the title. Seth Rollins is incapable of doing that. So with all that being said, motherfucks, I think we've made a good point here, and we've argued that Seth Rollins is, in conclusion, an overrated mid-card hack jobber. Cucks this.